Eleanor Davenport watched the pen hover over the signature line, a predator watching its prey finally surrender. The air in the mahogany-paneled office of her family lawyer was thick with the scent of old leather, expensive paper, and what she considered to be inevitable victory. Across the gleaming expanse of the desk sat Liam, her daughter Chloe's fiancé. He was a man Eleanor had assessed from their very first meeting as being pleasant, handsome, and utterly, disappointingly average. An architect, he'd said. A noble profession, perhaps, but one that built things for other, more important people. He was a stepping stone her daughter had mistaken for a destination. This document, this prenuptial agreement, was the correction. It was a fortress built of legalese, designed to protect the Davenport family's respectable, if not magnificent, wealth from a man who clearly had none of his own. Eleanor glanced at her husband, Richard, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod, his own expression a mask of smug satisfaction. They had done it. They had secured their daughter's future from her own poor judgment. Eleanor thought Liam was a nobody, a harmless but necessary inconvenience to be managed. She didn't know his full name was Liam Vance, and that his reclusive father, Marcus Vance, was a man whose personal wealth could purchase the entire city block they currently occupied, including every law firm, bank, and luxury high-rise, and still have enough left over to fund a small nation. Within the next 10 minutes, a single, softly spoken statement from Liam would detonate the foundations of the Davenport's world, leaving them in the rubble of their own arrogance. I hope you're settling in, because this is a story about the difference between wealth and worth, and the moment when a family that prided itself on its status was forced to learn that lesson. We love having you here with us. If you enjoy stories about quiet strength and deserved vindication, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's go back to where it all began, 3 months earlier, in a garden shimmering with fairy lights and bubbling with champagne. The engagement party was supposed to be a celebration of love. For Eleanor Davenport, it was a strategic social maneuver. Held in the meticulously landscaped backyard of their suburban estate, the event was a curated display of the Davenport's standing in the community. Guests milled about, their laughter tinkling like the ice in their glasses. Chloe, radiant in a white dress that caught the evening light, was a picture of happiness, her hand held firmly in Liam's. She saw only the man she loved. Her mother saw a problem to be solved. "So Liam," Eleanor began, her voice smooth as cream as she cornered him near the bar. She had a way of making a simple question feel like an interrogation. "Chloe tells us you're an architect. How fascinating. Do you work for a large firm? Anyone we might know?" Liam, who had been quietly observing the social dynamics with the trained eye of someone who designs spaces for people to live and work in, offered her a calm smile. "I run my own small firm, actually. Vance Designs. We specialize in sustainable urban projects." "Vance Designs," Eleanor repeated, the name meaning nothing to her. She tasted it and found it bland. How ambitious. It's so difficult to make a name for oneself these days, isn't it? So much competition. The implication was clear. You are small. You are unknown. "I find that good work tends to speak for itself," Liam replied, his tone even, betraying no offense. He had faced far more intimidating figures across boardroom tables than this woman in her silk dress and pearls. Richard Davenport joined them, clapping a hand on Liam's shoulder with a heartiness that didn't reach his eyes. "An architect. Good, solid profession. Tell me, what's the biggest project you've ever landed? A nice suburban home? A duplex, perhaps?" He chuckled, as if sharing a joke among equals, but his eyes were dismissive. He was a man who measured others by the size of their bank accounts and the prestige of their clients. Liam thought of the Helios Tower in Singapore, a revolutionary skyscraper that generated its own power. He thought of the coastal restoration project in Portugal that had won him the prestigious Pritzker Prize last year, a fact he'd kept out of the press by request. He thought of the private island compound he was designing for a tech mogul, a project with a budget that would dwarf the Davenport's entire net worth. "I've been fortunate to work on a few interesting things," he said, the understatement so vast it was almost a private joke. "Lately, my focus has been on a community revitalization project downtown." "Ah, charity work," Richard said, nodding with false magnanimity. "Commendable, but it doesn't pay the bills, does it?" He steered the conversation towards his own recent successes, a minor corporate litigation case he inflated into a legal epic. Liam listened politely, his gaze occasionally drifting to Chloe, who was now caught in a conversation with her aunt. He saw the slight tension in her shoulders, the forced brightness of her smile. She knew what her parents were doing, and she was letting them. This was the first cut, the first in a series of small humiliations designed to put him in his place. He felt the smooth, cool weight of his wallet in his jacket pocket. Inside was not a driver's license and a few credit cards, but a single folded piece of paper, a summary of his personal portfolio, a document whose bottom line could have ended this conversation in an instant. But patience was a form of strength, and Liam was a very, very strong man. He would let them build their case against him. He would give them all the rope they needed. The fall would be that much more dramatic. The evening wore on, a symphony of slights and condescensions. His education was questioned, his family background probed with thinly veiled disdain. "You're from Northwood?" one of Chloe's cousins had asked, wrinkling her nose. "Isn't that industrial?" Liam simply smiled and nodded, letting their assumptions paint a picture of him that was entirely of their own making. He was a blank canvas, and they were filling it with the drab colors of their own prejudice. As the party wound down and the last of the guests departed, Chloe finally came to his side, her relief palpable. "I'm so sorry about them," she whispered, her eyes pleading for understanding. "They can be a little much." "They love you," Liam said, his voice gentle. "They just want to be sure you're taken care of." It was a generous interpretation, and they both knew it. "They were awful, Liam. The way my dad was talking about your job." She trailed off, ashamed. "It's okay, Chloe," he said, and he meant it. It was okay, because he wasn't marrying her parents. He was marrying her. But as he drove away from the grand house that night, a seed of doubt had been planted. Not about his love for Chloe, but about whether that love would be enough to withstand the corrosive influence of her family. He knew this was only the beginning. The battle had been joined, not with a declaration of war, but with the clinking of champagne glasses and the sweet poison of polite disdain. He was the underestimated hero, and his antagonists had just revealed their fatal flaw. They judged the book by its plain, unassuming cover, completely unaware of the epic story written inside. A week after the engagement party, the first official salvo was fired. Eleanor called Chloe, her tone a careful blend of maternal concern and unyielding authority. She explained that, as a matter of prudence, a simple formality really, they felt it was essential for Liam and Chloe to sign a prenuptial agreement. "It's not about not trusting Liam, darling," Eleanor had purred over the phone, a conversation Chloe relayed to Liam later that evening with a pained expression. "It's about protecting you, protecting the family assets. Things can get so messy, and it's just cleaner this way. Your father and I insist." Liam was sitting in his sparsely furnished but elegant apartment, a space that spoke of quiet confidence and an eye for detail. Blueprints for a new museum wing were spread across his coffee table. He listened as Chloe nervously explained her mother's position, her words tumbling over each other in her haste to soften the blow. "She doesn't mean it to be insulting, Liam, I swear. It's just how they are. They see everything as a business transaction," Chloe said, wringing her hands. "It's just a piece of paper. We can sign it and it'll be over, and they'll get off our backs." Liam looked at her, at the genuine distress in her eyes. He saw her trapped between the man she loved and the parents she felt obligated to please. This was her test, and for now, she was failing it. She was the silent enabler, the one who would allow the injustice to happen for the sake of peace. He felt a pang of disappointment, but it was quickly replaced by a calm resolve. He had expected this. "Okay," he said simply. Chloe stared at him, surprised. "Okay? Just okay? You're not mad?" "Why would I be mad?" he asked, his voice a model of reason. "Your parents are looking out for their daughter's financial security. That's understandable. If it makes them feel better, I have no problem with it. Send the papers to me when they're ready. I'll look them over." His easy acceptance had the opposite effect he intended for Chloe, but precisely the one he anticipated for her parents. For Chloe, it was a relief so profound it bordered on guilt. She had been prepared for a fight, for anger, for hurt feelings. His placid agreement made her feel small, as if he were indulging a child's tantrum. For Eleanor and Richard, when Chloe relayed the news, it was confirmation of everything they believed. "He agreed without a fight?" Eleanor had said to Richard later that night, a triumphant glint in her eye. "Of course he did. He knows he has no leg to stand on. He's got nothing, and he knows it. This proves he's just grateful to be getting a seat at the table at all." Richard, ever the pragmatist, was more direct. "Good. This simplifies things. I'll have Henderson draw up a draft. Ironclad. Everything that's ours stays ours. Everything that's hers stays hers. And anything they accumulate will have a clear line of demarcation." His tone suggested he didn't expect Liam to accumulate much of anything. Liam, meanwhile, made a phone call. It was not to a lawyer. Not yet. It was to a man named Arthur Sterling, a quiet, silver-haired gentleman who had managed the Vance family's private investments for over 40 years. "Arthur," Liam said, his voice losing the gentle cadence he used with Chloe and taking on a sharper, more focused edge. "I need a complete, non-redacted summary of my personal holdings and current liquid assets. And I need a separate projection of the Q3 earnings for the architectural firm." "Is everything all right, Liam?" Arthur's voice was warm, paternal. He had known Liam since he was a boy. "Everything is proceeding as expected," Liam replied, a hint of steel in his voice. "I'm getting married, Arthur, and my future in-laws are very keen on financial transparency." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a soft chuckle. "Ah, I see. The Davenports, is it? Richard Davenport's firm has a substantial line of credit with a bank our holding company acquired last year. Small world." Liam's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is that so? Interesting. Just send me the documents, Arthur. I think they'll make for some illuminating reading." He hung up the phone. The game had changed. They thought they were dictating the terms of surrender. They had no idea he was preparing the battlefield for a war they didn't even know they were fighting. The prenuptial agreement, their symbol of power and control, was about to become his. He imagined the document, its dense paragraphs and legal jargon. It wasn't just a contract, it was a mirror. And when he was ready, he was going to force the Davenports to take a long, hard look at themselves in it. He picked up a pencil and returned to his blueprints, his hands steady, his mind clear. The lines he drew were clean, precise, and purposeful, just like the plan he was beginning to formulate. The humiliation was a necessary part of the construction. It was the demolition phase. What he would build in its place would be something founded on truth, not appearance. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in condescension. The Davenports, emboldened by Liam's easy acceptance of the prenup, escalated their campaign to remind him of his perceived station. The invitations became more pointed, the settings more opulent, each one a carefully constructed stage for Liam's next humiliation. One Saturday, they were summoned to the exclusive Lakeside Country Club for brunch. "You must see it, Liam," Eleanor had insisted. "It's where all of our friends are members. You and Chloe will need to get on the waiting list, of course. It can take years if you don't have the right sponsors." The club was a bastion of old money, a place where hushed conversations and silent judgments echoed across manicured lawns. Liam, dressed in a simple but well-tailored linen shirt and trousers, looked perfectly at ease, a fact that seemed to irritate Eleanor to no end. She had perhaps hoped he would show up in something inappropriate, marking him as an outsider. As they were seated on a terrace overlooking the golf course, Richard leaned in conspiratorially. "See that man over there?" he said, gesturing with his chin towards a portly man in plaid shorts. "That's Bob Vance. No relation, I assume." He laughed, a short, barking sound. "He runs a chain of hardware stores, made a killing. Now that's a success story. Built it from the ground up." Liam's expression didn't flicker. He thought of his own father, Marcus Vance, a man so private he was practically a myth. A man who had built a global empire from a single algorithm he'd written in his dorm room. A man whose name, when spoken in the right circles, could move markets. "No," Liam said calmly. "No relation." The meal was a succession of thinly veiled insults. Their friends would stop by the table, and Eleanor would introduce Liam with a qualifier. "This is Chloe's fiancé, Liam. He's an architect, just starting his own little firm. So brave." Each introduction was a subtle demotion, a public branding of his inadequacy. Liam simply smiled, shook hands, and answered their probing questions with unnerving politeness. He spoke about his work on the downtown revitalization, and they would nod with the kind of vacant sympathy one reserves for volunteers and missionaries. During a lull in the conversation, while Chloe was away from the table, Richard fixed him with a serious look. "Liam, I'm going to be frank with you. Chloe is used to a certain lifestyle. We've provided her with everything. Are you truly prepared to take on that responsibility? Architecture is a fine hobby, but it's a feast or famine business. My daughter will not be partaking in the famine half." The sheer audacity of the statement was breathtaking. It was a direct challenge to his manhood, his capability, his worth. Liam felt a familiar, cold calm settle over him. He met Richard's gaze without blinking. "I love your daughter, Richard," he said, his voice low and steady. "I would never allow her to want for anything. You have my word." "Words are cheap," Richard scoffed. "We're giving you our most precious asset. We need more than words." "I understand," Liam said. "That's why we're drawing up the agreement, isn't it? To make everyone feel secure." He subtly touched the breast pocket of his jacket. Inside, in a slim leather billfold, were the papers Arthur Sterling had sent over. He didn't need to look at them. He had memorized the numbers. The summary of his personal stock portfolio, his real estate holdings, including the building they were currently in, a fact he was certain the club's board was unaware of, and the astonishing net profit of his little firm. The document was a bomb, and he was carrying it in his pocket, waiting for the right moment. But this was not it. The humiliation was not yet complete. The pressure needed to build until the structure of their arrogance was ready to collapse under the slightest weight. Later, as they walked back to the car, Chloe was quiet, her jaw tight. The afternoon had been an ordeal for her too. She had spent hours watching the man she loved be systematically belittled by the people she was supposed to respect. "You don't have to put up with this," she finally said, her voice trembling slightly. "Why do you let them talk to you like that?" "They're your parents, Chloe," he said, unlocking the car. It was a sleek, dark gray Audi, a car that was nice but not ostentatious. He had a collection of much finer vehicles in a private garage, but this one suited the role he was playing. "They're testing me. It's what parents do." "No," she said, stopping and turning to face him. "This is more than that. This is cruel. It's like they're trying to break you, or break us." He saw the fire in her eyes, the first real spark of defiance she had shown on his behalf. It was a small victory, but a significant one. "They can't break what's real," he said softly, taking her hand. "Let them have their games. We know the truth." But as they drove away, he knew that wasn't entirely correct. He knew the truth. Chloe only knew a part of it, and the Davenports knew nothing at all. They were living in a world of their own construction, a fragile facade of superiority. And Liam, the architect, knew better than anyone that a building with a flawed foundation is destined to fall. He was just choosing the time and place for the demolition. The draft of the prenuptial agreement arrived via courier a few days later. It came in a thick, intimidating envelope from Henderson and Klein, Richard's law firm. Liam was in his home office, the late afternoon sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, when the doorman announced its arrival. He accepted the package with a quiet "thank you," the weight of it feeling both significant and absurdly light. He laid it on his large oak desk, next to a scale model of a sustainable community project he was designing for a coastal town in Northern California. For a moment, he simply looked at the envelope, a symbol of the Davenports' profound insecurity and their complete misjudgment of his character. It was their declaration of terms, their list of demands. He poured himself a glass of water and sat down, his movements deliberate. He slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener, a gift from a client in Japan. The document inside was thick, nearly 30 pages long, filled with dense, suffocating blocks of text. He began to read. It was, as Richard had promised, ironclad. It was also deeply insulting. The language was stark and clinical, but the message was emotionally brutal. It meticulously cataloged every asset belonging to the Davenport family: their house, their investment properties, their stock portfolio, even specifying Eleanor's jewelry and Richard's collection of antique clocks. All of it was designated as separate property, untouchable, now and forever. Then came the section on Chloe's assets, her trust fund, her future inheritance, the condominium they had bought for her after college, all shielded, walled off from him as if he were a marauding invader. The most galling part, however, was the section concerning marital property. It stated that any and all assets accumulated during the marriage would be subject to a ruthlessly detailed set of conditions. Any business Liam started, any income he generated, would be considered 50% Chloe's from the first dollar. Yet any appreciation in the value of Chloe's existing assets would remain solely hers. It was a one-way street, a contract designed not for a partnership, but for a master and a subordinate. It assumed he was bringing nothing to the table, and that anything he might one day gain would be a direct result of his association with them. As he read, Liam did not feel anger. The insult was so profound, so cartoonishly villainous, that it bypassed anger and went straight to a place of cold, analytical clarity. He began to make a mental list, a quiet catalog of grievances. Grievance number 1, the assumption of my poverty. Grievance number 2, the dismissal of my profession. Grievance number 3, the public humiliations at the club and the party. Grievance number 4, this document, this monument to their arrogance, which presumes I am both a fool and a gold digger. He read every line, every subclause. He noted the way it was structured to give Chloe the sole right to their primary residence in the event of a divorce, regardless of who paid for it. He noted the waiver of spousal support, which only applied to her seeking it from him, not the other way around. They had thought of everything. They had built a perfect cage. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked out at the city skyline. The sun was setting, painting the glass towers in hues of orange and gold. One of those towers, the tallest one, the one that defined the city's silhouette, was a Vance Corporation building. He had overseen the final stages of its design himself, anonymously, as a senior consultant. He picked up his phone and made a second call. This time, it was to a woman named Annalise Sterling, Arthur's daughter. While her father was a master of old-world finance, Annalise was a shark, one of the most feared corporate litigators in the country. She was a senior partner at the law firm that handled all of the Vance Corporation's most sensitive affairs. Annalise, he said, his voice calm. It's Liam Vance. Liam, she replied, her voice crisp and energetic. To what do I owe the pleasure? I trust you're not in any actual trouble. Only the kind you'll enjoy, he said. I'm emailing you a document, a prenuptial agreement drafted by a firm called Henderson and Klein. He could almost hear her smile through the phone. Let me guess, they think you're a pauper and they're trying to protect the family silver. You're remarkably perceptive, Liam said. I want you to draft a response, a new prenuptial agreement, my own version. I want it to be a mirror image of theirs, but with our numbers. I want every clause they applied to me, applied to them. I want it to be fair, Annalise, but I also want it to be a lesson. Consider it done, she said, the enthusiasm in her voice palpable. This sounds like fun. When do you need it? I'll let you know, Liam said. The signing is not yet scheduled. The other party still believes they are in control of the timeline. He glanced at the insulting document on his desk. Let them enjoy that belief for a little while longer. The fall will be that much more satisfying. He hung up and stood, walking over to the window. He looked down at the city below, a complex network of lights, of lives, of interconnected systems. The Davenports saw the world in simple terms: status, money, power. They saw him as a simple man with simple ambitions. They had no idea about the complex, powerful machinery that was now silently turning its attention towards them. The list of grievances was complete. The response was being prepared. All that was left was to choose the moment for the great reversal. The final act of humiliation was, in Eleanor's mind, a gesture of magnanimity. A week before the scheduled signing of the prenup, she and Richard invited Liam and Chloe to a gala fundraiser for the city's art museum. It was the premier event of the fall social season, a glittering affair where the city's elite gathered to see and be seen. It's important for people to see you, Liam, Eleanor had explained, her tone dripping with condescension disguised as kindness. It will help you make connections. You'll see how the real world works at this level. Liam agreed, as he always did, with a quiet grace that continued to unnerve them. When he and Chloe arrived, stepping out of his understated Audi, the Davenports were already there, holding court near the entrance. Eleanor's eyes did a quick, critical sweep of Liam's attire. He was wearing a classic, impeccably tailored tuxedo. It fit him better than Richard's, which was a touch too tight at the waist. This small detail was a minor annoyance to Eleanor. She had expected him to look out of place, perhaps in a rented suit. Instead, he looked like he belonged there more than anyone. The evening unfolded as a series of carefully orchestrated power plays. Richard would introduce Liam to his business associates, men who ran powerful banks and investment firms. This is Liam, Chloe's fiancé, he would say. He's an architect, very creative. The word creative was delivered as if it were a synonym for unprofitable. The men would give Liam a cursory handshake and a dismissive glance before turning back to Richard to talk about stock prices and mergers. They were speaking a language of power and money, and they assumed Liam was not fluent. Liam, who sat on the junior board of 3 international tech companies under an assumed name, simply listened, his expression one of polite interest. He was a ghost at their feast, present but unseen. At one point, Eleanor pulled him aside, gesturing to the grand hall around them. The museum wing they were in was a soaring space of glass and steel, a modern masterpiece. "Isn't it breathtaking?" she said. "This is the new contemporary wing. It was designed by some world-famous architect from Japan. Cost a fortune. This is what real success looks like, Liam, a legacy." Liam looked up at the complex geometry of the ceiling, the way the light played across the polished concrete floors. He knew every joint, every beam, every pane of glass. The world-famous Japanese architect, Kenji Tanaka, was a mentor and a close personal friend. Kenji had won the bid, but the core structural and aesthetic concepts had been born out of a series of long conversations and shared sketches with Liam, an uncredited collaboration that Liam had requested to maintain his privacy. "It's a remarkable space," Liam said, his voice neutral. "The use of cantilevered structures is particularly bold." Eleanor just nodded, not understanding the technical term, and moved on. The irony was a physical presence, a silent companion at Liam's side all night. The true purpose of the evening became clear over dinner. Seated at a prime table, Richard leaned across the floral centerpiece. "Liam," he began, his voice low, "about this prenup. My lawyer Henderson tells me you've had the draft for over a week. We haven't heard anything back. We're scheduled to sign on Tuesday. I trust there are no issues?" "I've been reviewing it," Liam said calmly. "It's a thorough document." "It's standard practice, you understand," Richard pressed on, mistaking Liam's calm for capitulation. "It's just business. Once it's signed, we can all move forward and be a family." Chloe, seated between them, looked down at her plate. The tension was making her miserable. She had pleaded with Liam to just sign the papers, to get it over with. His quiet deliberation was a mystery to her, and it was beginning to feel like stubbornness. She wanted the path of least resistance, and he was refusing to take it. "Of course," Liam said, meeting Richard's gaze. "Business." Later, as the evening was winding down, Liam found himself alone for a moment on a balcony overlooking the city lights. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Annalise Sterling. "The looking glass is polished and ready for them to gaze into it. I've taken the liberty of adding a small addendum regarding Henderson and Klein's outstanding liabilities with a certain financial institution. Just for context. Let me know when the curtain goes up. I'll be there." Liam smiled, a true, genuine smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His eyes were focused on the shimmering city below. The ally was in place. The final piece of the puzzle was ready. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. Chloe found him a moment later. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. "I'm fine," he said, turning to her. "It was an educational evening." "Don't be sarcastic," she said, her voice laced with exhaustion. "It was horrible. I hate this. I hate what they're doing." "Then why do you let them?" he asked, his voice still gentle, but with a new edge of challenge. It was the first time he had pushed back, not against her parents, but against her inaction. Chloe's eyes filled with tears. "Because they're my parents, and because I'm scared. I'm scared this whole thing, this wedding, us, is going to fall apart because of a stupid piece of paper." Liam reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "A piece of paper can't break anything that's real, Chloe, but a lack of courage can." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The signing is on Tuesday, at Henderson's office. I need you to trust me. No matter what happens, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She looked at him, at the profound stillness in his eyes, the absolute certainty in his posture. He wasn't the man her parents saw. He wasn't the man she had thought he was. He was something more, something deeper. Frightened but resolute, she gave a small nod. "Okay, Liam, I trust you." He nodded back, satisfied. The final test was not for him, but for her. The stage was set. The audience was in place. The quiet before the storm was about to begin. The morning of the signing dawned gray and overcast, the sky the color of slate. It was a fitting atmosphere for the day's business. Liam awoke early, as he always did, and went through his morning routine with a quiet, meditative focus. There was no sign of nervousness in his movements, no hint of the momentous confrontation that lay just a few hours away. He was an architect preparing to inspect the final details of a project years in the making. He chose his suit carefully, not a flashy one, but a bespoke, charcoal gray suit that fit him with understated perfection. It was the kind of suit that didn't shout its expense, but whispered it in the quality of the fabric and the precision of the cut. With it, he wore a simple white shirt and a dark navy tie. He was dressing not for a surrender, but for a board meeting where he held all the proxies. In his briefcase, alongside a portfolio of his own design work, he placed two documents. One was the insulting draft from Henderson and Klein, now marked with a few, almost imperceptible notes in the margins. The other was a thicker, more substantial document, bound in a simple blue cover. It was the prenup Annalise Sterling had drafted. It was the mirror. Chloe was a bundle of nerves. She had barely slept. "Are you sure about this, Liam?" she asked for the 10th time as he drove them towards the downtown district where the law offices were located. "We could just sign their version. It would make everything so much easier." "Easier is not always better," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. He reached over and took her hand. It was cold. "I told you to trust me. The time for that is now." They arrived at the building that housed Henderson and Klein. It was a respectable, if slightly dated, glass tower from the 1980s. As they rode the elevator up to the 24th floor, the silence was heavy. Chloe fidgeted with her purse. Liam stood perfectly still, his eyes on the ascending floor numbers. The law office was exactly as Liam had imagined it, a sea of beige carpets, dark wood furniture, and framed prints of hunting scenes. It smelled of weak coffee and old paper. A receptionist with a practiced, impersonal smile led them to a large conference room. Eleanor and Richard were already there, seated on one side of a long, polished table. With them was their lawyer, a man named George Henderson, whose face was a mask of professional solemnity, undermined by the triumphant gleam in his eyes. He looked like a cat who had cornered a particularly slow mouse. "Liam, Chloe, glad you could make it," Richard said, his tone magnanimous. "Let's get this bit of unpleasantness over with, shall we?" Eleanor gave a tight, superior smile. She was wearing a Chanel suit, her armor for the final victory. She looked at Liam, expecting to see a man defeated, resigned to his fate. Instead, she saw a man who looked utterly, unnervingly, at peace. It was disconcerting. They all took their seats, Chloe beside Liam, facing her parents. The room was a tableau of power dynamics. The Davenports and their lawyer, a united front of smug authority. Chloe, the conflicted pawn, and Liam, the quiet enigma. Henderson cleared his throat and slid a fresh copy of the agreement across the table towards Liam. A high-end fountain pen was placed neatly beside it. "Now this is the final execution copy," Henderson began in a smooth, patronizing tone. "I trust you've had ample time to review the draft. It's a fairly standard agreement designed to protect both parties, but primarily to secure Miss Davenport's existing and future family assets, as per her parents' wishes." Liam didn't look at the document. Instead, he looked at Richard, then at Eleanor. He held their gazes for a long moment, the silence stretching uncomfortably. "It is indeed a thorough document," Liam said, his voice filling the quiet room. It was not loud, but it had a quality of resonance that commanded attention. "It thoroughly communicates your opinion of me." Richard shifted in his seat. "Now, let's not get emotional. This is a business matter." "On the contrary," Liam replied, his eyes still locked on Richard. "I believe you've made it deeply personal, and since you've been so clear about your position, I feel it's only fair that I be equally clear about mine." He pushed the unsigned contract and the expensive pen back towards the center of the table. "I won't be signing this." The statement landed in the room with the force of a physical blow. Simple, devastating, final. Chloe gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Richard's face, which had been a mask of smugness, began to harden into a scowl. Eleanor's smile faltered, replaced by a look of sheer disbelief. "What do you mean you won't be signing it?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "After all this, you agreed." "I agreed to review it," Liam corrected her gently. "I never agreed to sign it. I wanted to see what it was you truly valued, and now I know." "This is a deal-breaker, son," Richard said, his voice low and threatening. "You sign that paper or this wedding is not happening. It's that simple." "You're mistaken," Liam said, his calm unwavering in the face of their shock and anger. "The wedding is not the subject of this meeting. Your profound and systematic disrespect is. We need to talk about that. I've made a list." He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped on the table. The quiet man they had all underestimated was gone. In his place was someone they did not recognize, someone who radiated an authority that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with absolute, unshakable self-worth. The storm had arrived. "A list?" Eleanor scoffed, a brittle laugh escaping her lips. "How dare you? After we've welcomed you into our home, into our lives?" "Let's talk about that welcome," Liam said, his voice cutting through her protestations with surgical precision. The first item on his list of grievances was now being presented. "Let's talk about the engagement party, where you and Richard spent the entire evening quizzing me on my finances and belittling my career in front of your friends. You didn't ask about my passions, my values, or my love for your daughter. You asked about the size of my projects and the prestige of my firm." Richard's face flushed a deep red. "We were just making conversation, getting to know you." "No," Liam countered, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than ever. "You were measuring me, and you found me wanting based on a set of assumptions that exist only in your own minds. Let's talk about the country club, where you paraded me around like a charity case you were generously sponsoring for the day, where you openly mocked my small firm and my commendable charity work." He turned his gaze to Eleanor, and she visibly flinched. "Let's talk about the museum gala. You showed me the new wing, a building you praised as a legacy of real success, and you had no idea that I was the uncredited lead designer on that project. The world-famous architect you mentioned, Kenji Tanaka, is a dear friend who asked for my collaboration." The air went out of the room. Chloe stared at Liam, her eyes wide with a dawning, shocking understanding. Her parents were speechless, their faces a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "And finally," Liam said, his voice returning to a normal volume, his point made, "let's talk about this document." He tapped the prenup with a single finger. "This isn't an agreement, it's an indictment. It's a 30-page testament to your belief that I am a worthless, opportunistic fool. It is the ultimate act of disrespect not only to me, but to your own daughter and her judgment." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the suffocating silence. He had held up the mirror. Now they were forced to look. "You have fundamentally misunderstood who I am," Liam continued, his tone shifting from accusation to simple fact. "You judge me by the car I drive, the quietness of my demeanor, and my refusal to brag about my accomplishments. You saw humility and mistook it for poverty. You saw patience and mistook it for weakness." Just then there was a soft knock on the conference room door. Before Henderson could say anything, the door opened. A woman entered. She was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark, powerful suit, her silver blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. She carried a leather briefcase and radiated an aura of such intense competence that everyone in the room, including Henderson, sat up a little straighter. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice crisp and clear. "My name is Annalise Sterling. I'm Mr. Vance's legal counsel. I believe you have a document of mine." She walked to the table and placed her briefcase down with a soft click. She looked at the stunned faces of the Davenports and their lawyer, her expression utterly neutral. Richard was the first to find his voice, though it was strained. "Vance? I thought... the hardware store." Liam gave a small, sad smile. "No, Richard, no relation to the hardware store. My full name is Liam Vance. My father is Marcus Vance." The name hung in the air for a moment, meaningless. Eleanor and Richard just stared. They were not in the circles where that name was spoken. But George Henderson, the lawyer, knew. His face went bone white. His professional composure dissolved into naked, primal fear. He looked from Liam to Annalise Sterling, and a terrible, dawning comprehension washed over him. "Marcus Vance?" Henderson whispered, his voice cracking. "As in, the Vance Corporation?" Annalise Sterling gave a curt nod. "The very same." She opened her briefcase and took out the blue-bound document. "Mr. Vance has no intention of signing your proposal," she said, her tone laced with contempt. However, in the interest of moving forward with his marriage to Miss Davenport, he has prepared a counter-proposal, a prenuptial agreement that accurately reflects the financial realities of the situation. She slid the document across the table. It landed in front of Richard with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been completely and irrevocably inverted. The judges had become the judged. The mouse had revealed itself to be a lion, and the cats were suddenly very, very small. Richard Davenport stared at the blue-bound document as if it were a venomous snake. He didn't dare touch it. The name Marcus Vance was echoing in his mind, connecting dots he hadn't known existed. The Vance Corporation wasn't just some faceless conglomerate, it was a behemoth, a silent giant in global finance, technology, and real estate. Its holdings were vast and labyrinthine. George Henderson, his face still pale, was frantically, silently, trying to recall every interaction his firm had ever had with any entity even remotely connected to that name. His mind was a whirlwind of panic. Annalise Sterling broke the silence, her voice as sharp as breaking glass. "Perhaps you should open it, Mr. Davenport. The first few pages contain a summary of Mr. Vance's personal assets. We felt it was important for everyone to be operating from a shared set of facts." With a trembling hand, Richard reached out and pulled the document closer. He opened it. Eleanor leaned in, her face a mask of horrified curiosity. Chloe, meanwhile, couldn't take her eyes off Liam. She wasn't looking at a stranger. She was seeing the man she knew, the kind, patient, humble man she loved, but in a new, sharper focus. His quietness wasn't a lack of confidence. It was the stillness of immense, restrained power. Richard's breath hitched. Eleanor let out a small, strangled gasp. The numbers on the page were astronomical, beyond their comprehension. They were not just looking at the wealth of a rich man, they were looking at the kind of generational, dynasty-level fortune that reshapes landscapes. Liam's small architectural firm was listed, its net annual profits exceeding the entire Davenport family net worth by a factor of 10. His personal investment portfolio, managed by Arthur Sterling, was detailed in a multi-page appendix that made Richard's own portfolio look like a child's piggy bank. This is impossible," Eleanor stammered, her voice a reedy whisper. She looked at Liam, her eyes wide with a desperate, pleading confusion. "You're an architect." "I am," Liam confirmed, his voice gentle once more. "It's what I love to do. I've been fortunate that my work has been successful, but my family's success is in other areas. I've kept my name separate from my work because I wanted to be judged on my own merits. It appears I have been." The quiet devastation of that statement settled over them. They had judged him, and their judgment was a catastrophic failure. Annalise Sterling was not finished. "If you'll turn to Appendix C, Mr. Henderson," she said, her gaze now fixed on the terrified lawyer. "It contains a summary of Henderson and Klein's current liabilities, specifically the rather substantial line of credit your firm holds with Sterling Trust Bank." Henderson looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. We... Sterling Trust Bank," Annalise continued, her voice relentless, "was fully acquired by a Vance Corporation holding company 6 months ago, which means, Mr. Henderson, that my client, Mr. Vance, is effectively your firm's primary creditor." Richard looked from Henderson to Liam, his face a canvas of dawning horror. His law firm, his pride and joy, the source of his smug superiority, was financially beholden to the very man he had just spent 3 months systematically insulting. "And there's more," Annalise said, her tone becoming even colder. "Your firm's largest client, a manufacturing company called Omnicorp, is currently the subject of a hostile takeover bid. The acquiring party, a private equity firm, is financed exclusively by the Vance Corporation. The deal is set to close next week. If it does, Omnicorp's new leadership will be reassessing all its legal and professional contracts. including yours. This was the final, fatal blow. Richard slumped back in his chair, all the air going out of him. His entire professional world was teetering on a precipice, and he had just spent months insulting the man who held the rope. Eleanor was white-faced, her hands trembling in her lap. The Chanel suit no longer looked like armor. It looked like a costume on a woman who had just forgotten all her lines. Her world of status, of appearances, of judging others from a position of perceived superiority had been a fragile illusion, and it had just been shattered into a million pieces. "Now," Liam said, his voice cutting through the wreckage. He took Chloe's hand, his touch a grounding force in the chaos. "This new agreement," he nodded towards the blue document, "it is a mirror of the one you presented to me. It protects my assets, which, as you can see, are substantial. It designates my family inheritance as separate property. It ensures that in the unlikely event of a divorce, your daughter will be treated fairly and generously. But it also protects me from the kind of predatory litigation your own documents seem to anticipate." He looked directly at Chloe, his eyes full of a love that was now mixed with a profound sadness for what she had been put through. "Chloe, I love you. I want to build a life with you, a real partnership. This document ensures we can do that on a foundation of truth and mutual respect." He then turned his gaze back to her parents. "I don't need you to sign it. This is my offer, my terms. The wedding will proceed if and only if Chloe agrees to marry me, knowing everything. Your approval," he said, the words landing with devastating finality, "is no longer a relevant factor in the equation." The reversal of fortune was absolute. The ones who had demanded now had to plead. The one who had been diminished now held all the power. The room was silent, save for the sound of Richard's ragged breathing. Eleanor stared at her hands, unable to meet anyone's gaze. They had sought to secure their daughter's future and had, through their own hubris, nearly destroyed their own. The quiet bomb had gone off, and the fallout was just beginning. The immediate aftermath was a scene of utter disintegration. Richard, his face ashen, could only stare at the blue-bound prenup, a document that represented not just his humiliation, but the potential ruin of his entire professional life. Eleanor, for the first time since Liam had met her, looked small. Her carefully constructed facade of aristocratic superiority had crumbled, leaving behind a bewildered, frightened woman. "Liam, we didn't know," she stammered, the words catching in her throat. It was a pathetic attempt at an apology, an excuse masquerading as remorse. "That is the entire point, Eleanor," Liam said, his voice devoid of anger, filled only with a deep, resonant disappointment. "You didn't know. You didn't care to know. You made a judgment based on nothing but your own prejudice. You decided who I was, and you treated me accordingly." George Henderson, seeing his career flashing before his eyes, scrambled to recover. "Mr. Vance, Liam, perhaps we can discuss this. There's no need for any drastic action. My firm, we would be honored to." Annalise Sterling cut him off with a glacial stare. "Mr. Henderson, I suggest you remain silent and advise your clients. Your firm's fate is no longer in your hands. It will be decided based on your client's next actions, and more importantly, on Mr. Vance's generosity." The threat was unspoken but crystal clear. Their survival depended on Liam's grace. Liam stood up, pulling Chloe's chair back for her. He looked only at her, his eyes searching her face. Her expression was one of shock, but also of dawning clarity. She was seeing her parents not as the powerful, all-knowing figures of her childhood, but as flawed, prejudiced people. "Chloe," he said softly, his voice for her ears only. "Let's go. We have nothing more to discuss here." He started to lead her towards the door, leaving her parents and their lawyer stewing in the toxic silence. "Wait!" Richard's voice was desperate. He lunged forward, his hand grabbing Liam's arm. The confident, condescending patriarch was gone, replaced by a pleading, terrified man. "Please, son, Don't do this. We made a mistake, a terrible mistake. Don't punish us for it. Don't ruin me." Liam stopped and looked down at Richard's hand on his arm, then back up at his face. He felt no triumph, only a profound sense of pity. "This was never about punishing you, Richard," he said, his voice low and firm. "It was about protecting myself and your daughter from you, from your arrogance, from your belief that a person's worth is measured by their bank statement." He gently removed Richard's hand from his arm. "Whether or not you are ruined is up to you. It will depend entirely on whether you are capable of learning from this." He then looked at Chloe. "The choice is yours. Do you want to stay here with them, or do you want to leave with me and start our life?" This was the moment, the ultimate test for her. Her loyalty could lie with the broken power of her family or with the quiet, proven strength of the man she loved. Chloe looked at her parents, at their desperate, pleading faces. She saw the ugliness of their behavior laid bare. Then she looked at Liam, who stood waiting, his expression patient, his love for her unwavering despite everything. The choice was not a choice at all. "I'm going with Liam," she said, her voice shaking but firm. She walked to his side and took his hand, a public declaration of her allegiance. Eleanor let out a soft sob. It was the sound of a mother not just losing an argument, but losing the moral authority she never realized she had taken for granted. Liam and Chloe walked out of the conference room, leaving the Davenports to drown in the consequences of their own making. Annalise Sterling remained behind for a moment, gathering her papers. "My office will be in touch, Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. "We will be auditing your firm's finances and your handling of the Omnicorp account. I suggest you be prepared." She turned to Richard and Eleanor. "As for the wedding, Mr. Vance's offer stands. His prenup is on the table. It is non-negotiable. Whether you are invited to the ceremony will depend on your ability to offer a sincere and meaningful apology to both your daughter and your future son-in-law." With that, she swept out of the room, leaving a silence that was heavier and more damning than any accusation. The great reversal was complete. The powerful were humbled. The humble were revealed as powerful. And the relationships that had been built on a foundation of lies and status were now forced to find new, more honest ground, or perish completely. The weeks that followed the confrontation were a period of profound and painful recalibration for the Davenport family. The world did not end, but the world they had known did. Richard's law firm was not destroyed. Liam, in an act of grace Richard did not deserve, instructed Annalise Sterling to be firm, but not fatal. The Vance Corporation, as the new primary creditor, forced a complete restructuring of Henderson and Klein. Richard was allowed to keep his position as a senior partner, but he was no longer the man in charge. He now answered to a board whose members were appointed by Annalise's firm. He was forced into a position of humility, reporting his every move, his expense accounts scrutinized, his authority curtailed. The Omnicorp account was, as predicted, reassessed. It was not pulled entirely, but it was drastically reduced, a constant, painful reminder of his monumental misjudgment. Every day he went to work was an exercise in eating humble pie. Eleanor's punishment was less tangible, but no less severe. Her social standing, the currency she valued above all else, was rendered worthless. News of the incident didn't spread through gossip columns, but the shift in the family's fortunes was palpable. The invitations to exclusive events began to dry up. The fawning calls from her friends became less frequent. She had built her identity on the shaky ground of her husband's success and her family's name, and when that ground shifted, she found she had nothing solid to stand on. Her real punishment was self-inflicted. She was forced to live in a world where her judgment was proven worthless, her values hollow. The most difficult test, however, was the one Annalise Sterling had laid out for them: the apology. A week after the meeting, a stilted, formal letter arrived at Liam's apartment, full of legalese and carefully worded expressions of regret for the misunderstanding. Liam read it and threw it in the trash. A few days later, Eleanor called Chloe, weeping, begging for forgiveness, blaming Richard, blaming Henderson, blaming everyone but herself. Chloe, who was now living with Liam and seeing a therapist to unpack the years of her parents' toxic influence, listened patiently before telling her mother that an apology that came with excuses was not an apology at all. Finally, 2 weeks before the wedding, they asked to see Liam and Chloe in person. They met not in a lawyer's office or a fancy club, but in the neutral territory of a quiet public park. Richard and Eleanor looked older, diminished. There were no power suits or designer dresses. They were just two people who had been stripped of their pretenses. Richard spoke first, his voice hoarse. He didn't make excuses. He looked Liam in the eye and for the first time spoke to him as an equal. "I was wrong," he said. "My behavior was inexcusable. I was arrogant, I was cruel, and I was blinded by my own foolish pride. I judged you, and I failed the test. I am sorry, not because of what you can do to my firm, but because I deeply wronged you and my own daughter." Eleanor's apology was quieter, more difficult. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke to Chloe. "I thought I was protecting you," she whispered, "but I was only protecting my own vanity. I was so afraid of you marrying someone who wasn't good enough that I couldn't see the wonderful, good man who was standing right in front of you. I hurt you, and I hurt him. I am so sorry." It was the first genuine thing Liam had ever heard either of them say. The apologies were accepted, not with warmth, but with a solemn nod. The damage was too deep for a quick reconciliation, but the first stone in a new foundation had been laid. Liam and Chloe were married a month later. It was not the grand society wedding Eleanor had planned. It was a small, intimate ceremony at a beautifully restored, historic chapel downtown. One of the first buildings Liam's firm had saved as part of its revitalization project. Marcus Vance was there, a quiet, smiling man in a simple suit who shook Richard's hand firmly and spoke with Eleanor about her garden. His presence was the final, unspoken confirmation of the new reality. Richard and Eleanor were there too, as guests. Not as hosts, not as the proud parents of the bride, but as quiet, humbled observers, grateful to be included. The prenup Chloe and Liam signed was the one Annalise had drafted. It was a document of immense fairness, protecting both of them, but more than that, it was a symbol of their partnership. A partnership built not on assets or status, but on the truth they had fought to reach. Their life together began not with a compromise to appease arrogance, but with a courageous stand for respect and dignity. The lesson was learned, the consequences were delivered, and a new, more honest chapter had begun. In the end, this was never a story about money. The billions of dollars were irrelevant, a mere plot device to expose a deeper truth. This was a story about worth. The Davenports believed worth was something you acquired, displayed, and defended. It was a matter of status, of appearances, of belonging to the right clubs and knowing the right people. They spent their lives polishing the exterior, terrified that someone might see the emptiness inside. Liam knew that true worth is not external, it is internal. It is the quiet confidence of integrity, the patience to withstand insult without losing your dignity, the strength to be gentle, and the wisdom to know that respect cannot be demanded, only earned. He never needed to prove his wealth. He only needed to reveal their poverty of character. The greatest vindication was not in their downfall, but in the quiet triumph of his own principles. He maintained his moral high ground, never stooping to their level, never becoming cruel or petty. His victory was not in crushing them, but in forcing them to see themselves, and in doing so, giving them the slimmest chance at redemption. And what of Chloe? She learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the people who love you the most can also be the most damaging, and that true adulthood begins the moment you have the courage to choose your own values over the ones you inherited. Her love for Liam was real, and it was that reality that gave her the strength to weather the storm and come out the other side, not as a Davenport, but as a Vance. A name she now understood meant more than just money. It meant integrity. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. That true strength doesn't need to announce itself. We all face our own versions of the Davenports, people who judge us on superficial things, who try to put us in a box. The question is, how do we respond? Do we let their judgment define us, or do we hold fast to our own sense of worth, patiently waiting for the moment to reveal the truth?